This lecture discusses scholarly writing, and it's a simple introduction into the APA. This is a tool-focused discussion more so than specifics of APA. That will be discussed later. We'll be talking about how to write in a scholarly fashion. The thing we'll talk about first is why you should care and why it's important to you. Then we'll go through the process of getting started, and then briefly touch on the overall process of writing, an approach that I use, and it's worked well for me. And then I'll also include some references and resources for additional information. You may be asking yourself why you should care about scholarly writing. And the simple fact is 40% of your grade comes from writing and presentations that will occur during the residency. It's important, and it's important that you do it well. It's also, if you do it incorrectly, a very risky thing for your educational career, because at UC, if we detect plagiarism, we will deal with it, and after a process, you will be expelled. So it's important that we get it down and get it right, and that I help you by equipping you with the tools that can help you do it the correct way. It's also an expectation at a graduate school level that you can write in a scholarly fashion. And the last thing is that people judge you by how you write. So if you're corresponding with someone in email, they will grade you to some extent based upon how you write. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. Generally, the process of getting started is a one-time event. Once you have your environment set up, if you're working locally using Microsoft Word, once you have it installed, have Grammarly and Zotero installed, then you're usually done. I would recommend spending the time to become familiar with the tools, especially if you're early in your academic journey. Taking the time to figure out how it all works is time well spent. Recently, whenever I completed my doctorate, early in the process, I figured out how to use the tools that we were using very effectively, and it helped me through the entire process. You'll also need to decide along the way if you're going to do things online using APA's Academic Writer, or if you're going to do it in a local, more traditional approach using Microsoft Word and Grammarly and Zotero. Regardless of either path, you're going to want to install at least a portion of Grammarly and activate your Grammarly license. As part of your being a student at UC, you can connect and log into Academic Writer using your University of Cumberland's credential or your email, and it'll set up an account for you. What it does is guide you through the process of creating an APA paper correctly. It's an online tool that allows you to produce Word documents or PDFs for submission to either your schools, or if you're writing for journals. It doesn't take away the process. You still have to write your paper. You still have to start the process by gathering references, keeping track of them, which it will help you with. You still have to organize your paper by creating an outline that structures the content in a way that is expected by the reader. And you still have to do the actual writing. You still have to take the information that you've read while gathering your references, distill it inside of your mind, and then produce something that is distinct from what it was that you read. If you copy something and paste it directly into your paper, I guarantee you that the tools that we use will catch it. So you have to go through the process of distilling it, understanding it, and then writing it back down. The process of creating a paper is pretty straightforward. Once you log on to Academic Writer, you just go and you click on the Write New Paper. The next step is to select the template you're going to use. Most of the time, you'll be using a basic paper. There are other types of papers that are supported, and if depending upon where you go in your academic journal, you may end up doing things like writing a case study or doing a literature review. And if so, this comes in very handy for that. But for the courses that you're taking at UC, as far as I've seen, most likely you'll just need a basic paper. The next thing is you need to tell it what it is you're planning to do with the paper. So why are you creating this paper? You'll most likely want to select student assignment because that's most likely what you're going to be writing. If you're going to be writing a manuscript for some other journal, then you would select the second choice. The title of a paper is one of the more challenging and important things to write. you put it in according to the APA academic writer at the beginning, and that may be case that you put in either a working title or a title that you think it will be. You can always revise it and update it later on, but it is one of the more significant things that you need to do. It needs to be concise. It needs to tell the reader what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the paper, and it can't be overly long and it can't be too short. So it's something that takes some time to craft. You'll notice on the screen I've pointed an arrow at the little G with a green dot around it. That's telling you that Grammarly is installed in the browser that I was using whenever I looked at this page. If you click that button, if something is wrong, it will help you with things like grammar and spelling. And that's one of the nice things that we'll talk about later, is how Grammarly has an extension for Chrome that makes life much easier if you're dealing with web pages and writing content into them. The next step in the process is to actually put the title that you're going to use onto the title page. And also, you'll need to put something in the box that says running head. It needs to be short. It's kind of a carryover from the older style of APA, to where it's basically put at the top of each page. On the first page, it says running header : and then the all uppercase letters that you put here. So in this case, it might be something like security or diligence and security or whatever. And then on the subsequent pages, pages 2 through the end of the rest of the paper, it just has that word or phrase up at the top of the page. It is part of the APA standard, so you need to put it in. You also want to supply a date and potentially the professor's name, the course, and course number. The next step is to add the authors. And in a lot of cases, it may be a single author, but in the case of your residency, it's going to be a group paper. So if you were using this tool as part of a group paper, you would definitely want to put in the group, each of the authors that are part of the group. And also for your affiliation type, it's an institution, and you would put the institution's name down there. So it'd be the University of the Cumberlands. And the next step is the actual writing. So once you've given it the title of the paper, and you can see up at the top in the breadcrumb trail, it says home, writing center, my papers, and then the title of this paper. And a few minor points around very little on APA style. The first paragraph of the paper is the introduction. It should not have a title that says introduction. So there's no heading that says introduction. We know it's the introduction because it's the first thing in the paper. Then you want to do subsequent, and here they call them sections, but it's those headings. So first topic to consider is a heading 1. So it's a level 1 heading. It's similar to what you do in an outline, to where you've got your topmost points, and then underneath of each point you have subpoints. So the second level in would be heading level 2, and so on. But the key thing is to use these sections to organize your paper. It helps the reader know what it is that you're talking about and the thought that goes together. Also, a very minor point, make sure that you have at least 3 sentences in each paragraph per APA. That's the necessary. And basically those 3 sentences should be something that introduces the concept, something that talks a little bit about it, and then something that concludes it. And that's where they get that you should have 3. Make sure that the paragraph is around a single thought, so it shouldn't have multiple kind of main topics. There should be 1 topic per paragraph, even if that 1 topic is introducing 3 topics that you're going to talk about in subsequent paragraphs. So again, I'm not going to dig in too heavily onto the actual style of APA, but it is something that you want to consider. And certainly if you have questions, you can ask me, and there's some additional resources that are available. When you're writing your paper, you're going to want to add references, and the reason you do is that in scholarly disciplines, we expect you as the student to tell us where you got your idea, and the simple point is that until you're an expert in the field, meaning that you're a doctorate level person that has studied something extensively and is recognized as an expert, you can't really have an opinion that you can justify. Your opinions need to be justified by citations. And even as a doctor, whenever you're writing a paper, you reinforce your argument that you're making with citations. So you definitely need to have references. A reference is what you see on the screen. A citation is whenever you talk about that, and you'll inject it into the paper itself at various points. So the key thing from an academic writing perspective is make sure you are supplying references to each thing that you're pulling information from. And if you directly quote it, it needs to be inside of quotes, and there are rules around how you quote it. And this will actually tell you or ask you at the point that you're adding a citation, is this a direct quote or not? Generally speaking, you don't want to do a lot of direct quotes. If a paper has a large number of direct quotes, that can actually be detrimental as well. We being the instructors in your courses, expect you to read something, understand it, and then tell us what it means in your own words, not the author's words. We can go read the paper if we want to ourselves. We want to know what you think it means. And that's the key point of this kind of writing, is for you to read it, understand it, and then explain it in a way that we can understand using your words, your ideas. When adding references, you actually have two choices in Academic Writer. It has itself a search approach, so you can actually search for terms, and then it can return back to you a list of papers, and you can add a paper directly in from that search system. Alternatively, you can create a reference and add it yourself from some other system. So the places that I usually go to get references, and this is an important part of the process, is Google Scholar is great for finding scholarly articles. And that's the key thing to understand. What does it mean when someone says scholarly, right? Scholarly is not a .com under most cases. You can reference a .com. So, and if you're talking about F5 as a manufacturer of load balancers or firewalls, you can reference f5.com, but it's not considered a scholarly source because it's not something that's been peer reviewed by other practitioners or academics in the field. It's not had the same degree of rigor of expectations. So in general, there's peer-reviewed journals, there are books, and there are organizational websites. Those are always safe. Everything else you have to be very careful about. You have to consider the degree of academic level of that writing. So in short, whenever you're citing something, it needs to be itself academic in nature, or from the practitioner's point of view through a peer-reviewed process. So during the actual body of the text is where you add the citation. So a citation is essentially a link to a reference, right? So whenever you're going, you say find and cite reference, insert it, and you'll go through the process of selecting which citation or which reference it is you're wanting to cite. And at the end of it, it'll put in the author's name and a date in parentheses inside of the text. That's the APA style of citation. Again, I'm not going to get into too much of the details of that, but this tool will help you with things like if you're quoting, there's a particular way that needs to be done and so on, and it'll help with that. One of the important parts of this process is that once you've written your paper, you need to download it so you can submit it, right? So whenever you're done writing and you've reviewed it, and used Grammarly inside of the content to double check it. Once you think it's in pretty good shape, you can download it to a Word document, which is what you would want to submit into the course. Also of interest is the Collaborate tab on this screen. That's something that if I were a student in this class, I would probably spend a little time looking at, especially if I was going to use this during the residency, because I think that would make a lot of sense to share the workload while you're writing your paper in the residency. The alternative approach to using Academic Writer is to install the Grammarly plugin into Word and use Zotero as your citation and reference tool. The advantage of that approach is that it works offline. You don't have to be online, and it's also gives you greater control over the process. The downside is you need a good template to start from, and you have to do more of kind of the hard work yourself. If you're new to APA and starting out, I would probably go with Academic Writer. It's a whole lot simpler process to guide. If you're very good in Word and you're familiar with it, then I would probably stick with Word. But it's a personal choice. But again, Academic Writer is probably a good place to start. Regardless of which of those two choices you use, you're going to want to install Grammarly. The first question you have is, well, what is the thing, right? So it's an advanced spelling and grammar checker. It's similar to the tools that are built into a lot of word processors today, but it's at a much more advanced level. It also includes things like plagiarism checking, so that it can warn you that something you have in your paper is a little too close to something that it knows about. To start the process, you should have received an email in the last week or so that has a link in it to click to activate your account on Grammarly. You want to go through that process. If you have any challenges with it, let me know and I'll get you in touch with the right people. Once you've got the account set up and activated, you'll want to go and install the Office plugin. What that does is it allows it to be available to you inside of Word and also Outlook. So if you're using Outlook for your email client, Grammarly will be active inside of it, which means that it can help you write better emails. The last thing, and one of the things that I think is more important than maybe even Outlook, depending upon what you're doing in Office, is the Chrome extension. This link may be old. If it doesn't work, then search for Grammarly inside of Chrome's extensions. What it'll do for you is on every text box that you're typing in inside of Chrome, it will make Grammarly available, including things like inside of iLearn and the discussion board post and so on. So it's always there, always checking and always warning you whenever you mess up. One of the things that Grammarly will do is help you become a better writer, because it'll start showing you over time. You will notice that you're making the same sort of mistakes each time, and that allows you to improve and stop doing some of those things that you do that may be wrong or incorrect. Grammarly also has a web application. There are times that you have to use the web application. One example is there's a process of creating a report from a Word document that you basically upload the document into the web application, tell it that you want it to run a report against it to tell you how good it is and to tell you what an overall score is on the document. But as a general practice, I personally don't use this web application hardly at all. And that's primarily because I'm using the Word plugin and the Chrome extension. Once you've installed the Grammarly Word plugin, it essentially adds a tab to the ribbon bar at the top. And selecting that tab, you are presented with a choice of opening Grammarly and closing Grammarly. I've got it open here, and it's showing you on the right side the things that need to be addressed, and on the left side they're highlighted and so on. The key thing to understand when you're using Grammarly is it will not get things right every single time. It will make mistakes occasionally, but generally, if it tells you something is wrong with the sentence, what it's telling you may not be the thing that's actually wrong, but you really want to look at that sentence because there's probably something that isn't exactly right. Also, you'll see it up in the ribbon bar where it says General Academic. That's a drop down that lets you select the appropriate type of checking that it should be doing. So if it's a personal correspondence or if it's something that's scholarly and so on, you'll want to select the General Academic at least. Also, right now you can see that I don't have the plagiarism checking turned on. You can actually turn that on and it will check your content against a set of resources that it knows about to determine things that look too much like something else. So it's not going to be 100%, but it's going to definitely help you. There's also Turnitin, the tool that we use here, I believe allows you to upload a draft version of your document and have it checked. I've enabled that for our submissions. During the residency, we'll double check and make sure it's actually working. But one of the things that I firmly believe is that you should not be judged on something like a plagiarism check unless you've had the ability to test it yourself first. This is one way that you can do that, is by using Grammarly. It may not be the exact same type of checking that's being done, but it's something that you should definitely do. This is an example of the Grammarly Chrome extension, and I'm actually showing the example of what it looks like whenever it's used on Academic Writer. So what I did was activate the Chrome extension, and then I went to the Academic Writer website. As I was typing, I made the mistake of using effects instead of affects, right? So it's a common type of mistake, but it caught it and it told me what was going on. And the little pop-up that's showing happened because I clicked on the underlined word. You can also click down there in the right below where the red 1 is in the circle. You can click that and bring up Grammarly into basically like a full screen mode that lets you edit the content in a more interactive way. For the academic writer, that's not quite as useful, but it's definitely useful for things like discussion board posts. This is a continuation of the discussion on Grammarly's Chrome extension. You can also see there on the right side, there's an overall score that it assigns to the paper that it's looking at. The higher the number, the better. Generally speaking, if something is in the 70s, there's some actual structural issues. So in my case, there's some commas that need to be added. You'll see sometimes when it tells you this sentence needs to be rewritten, that's because the sentence is in passive voice. Passive voice is something that you run into a lot whenever you're dealing with academic writing. What it basically means is you can't tell who it is that's doing the action. So you say something happened, but you don't say who did it. So a survey was administered, that's a passive voice statement. I administered a survey to the participants as an active voice kind of statement, but the problem is inside of most academic writing, we're not allowed to use first person. So you can't say I or you or those sort of words whenever you're writing in a scholarly fashion. There are exceptions to that, and it's not necessarily something that is an APA restriction. It's more of an institutional sort of thing. Most institutions don't like the word I. They want you to use passive voice, frankly. And so don't worry too much about those. This also makes recommendations around the richness of your vocabulary. So you can see where it's telling me to choose some synonyms for some of the words I've used. That's probably because I use those same words too many times, or those words are too common. So it tries to make your writing a little more interesting by having you use more and different sets of words. Zotero is a thing that lets you keep track of your references. It's very similar to what the APA's academic writer is doing for you behind the scenes. Word also has something that's just like it or similar to it that does a similar thing, but the Word reference functionality is a bit restrictive in a lot of ways. Zotero also lets you do things like store the actual document if it's, say, a PDF that you're referring to. So if you went to a Google Scholar, you found a document, there happened to be a paper that you could get, the PDF version of that document, and you downloaded it and read it, you can actually attach that PDF into Zotero itself so that it'll keep track of it. And it is integrated with Word as well. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail or any more detail on it. If needed, we can talk about it more in subsequent lectures. This is the overall process that I typically use whenever I'm writing. It's pretty close, and it's maybe a little different than some of the things you've seen before. So the first thing, obviously, is figure out what you're going to write about. So pick a topic, or there's sometimes the topics are assigned to you. So you find something that's interesting that you want to write about. You go out and collect a lot of references and store them in some sort of a reference tracking tool. So be it APA, Academic Writer, or Zotero, or there's another tool called EndNote, whatever it might be that you use to do it. It's essentially like going to the library and grabbing a bunch of books and taking them to a table and you start reading through them. It's that concept, but in an electronic form. So I gather a bunch of resources, I start looking through them, and I make notes of what ones say things that I want to use and what things speak to my topic very well and summarize what I'm looking for. Not everything that you search for and find will be included in your paper. In fact, a large portion of them may not be, but you have to gather a bunch of things and read a bunch of things to find the things that you really want to use. I then use an APA template and use the Microsoft Word approach. What the APA template will do for you is it'll have a placeholder text in places for things like your title page, where the title goes on the title page, and it also goes on the first page of the paper after the title page. It'll have the footers or the headers set up correctly for the running header and so on. You definitely want to do that versus start from a blank page. And in fact, if you're inside of Microsoft Word, if you do, whenever you're creating the paper, if you search for a template inside of it, you can find one that's actually fairly usable. The next step, once you've kind of got a paper, you've got your references, and you've done a fair amount of reading of those references, is to start creating the outline. I usually create the outline inside of Word using headings. So rather than creating a bulleted outline, which is the way that you may have been taught, I typically create it as headings inside of the paper and start making the paper's structure show inside of those headings. So how it is I'm going to do, obviously I'll write something that says either introduction goes here, or I might even write portions of the introduction. Although typically you'll write your introduction a little later in the process because you need to know what you're going to introduce. Also, make sure that it flows correctly, that things look right. Make sure that you don't have, if you're using multiple levels of headings, make sure you don't have a subheading that only has one item. That's one of those things you don't ever do. There should be at least 2, if not 3 sub items underneath of each heading. So if you have a heading 1 and then you have 2 heading 2s underneath of it, that's okay, but it's not fantastic. If you had 1 heading 2 underneath of that heading 1, you'd want to probably pull it back into the main heading. Also make sure that you're organizing your thoughts, and it's whatever works for you best. For me, putting it onto Word works well. For others, they may need to write it down on paper with pen or pencil. But make sure you spend the time to get your organization around how the paper is structured. Oftentimes an assignment will tell you how it should be structured. They'll tell you these are the 3 things you need to talk about. So if those are the 3 things you need to talk about, guess what? Those are your 3 main headings, right? And then you're going to introduce them. You're going to talk about each one of them as each one of them being in a separate heading. You'll probably have one additional heading that maybe either compares and contrasts and so on, and then you'll have a conclusion. So that's your template right there, the basic structure of the paper. A key thing here, and I may sound like I'm restating it over and over again, is do not copy text into this paper from some source. Everything that goes into this paper needs to be from you. You need to write it yourself. So you need to read something and then write it in, and it needs to be different from what it was that you read. So it has to be something that's been through your thought processes, your understanding, your digestion and distillation of those concepts is what we're looking for. So you have to be able to write it in your own words. So do not copy into that paper. There are some people that will copy things in and then rewrite them. That's a bad habit to get into, and there's always that chance that you'll forget to do the rewriting part and it'll get flagged by the plagiarism checker. So simply put, do not copy things from an external source into that paper. Then along the way, I'm usually using Grammarly to check my writing. I'll oftentimes check it even at a paragraph level or so on. But if I'm actually in the flow and actually writing effectively, a lot of times I'll let it go and ignore the errors that it's flagging until I get my thoughts onto the screen. Once that's done, I'll go back and check it again, and then I always give it a one good thorough check before I submit it. This is a list of the resources that are available to you. Some of these are University of Cumberland resources. So there's the library and there's the Learning Commons, they call it TLC. If you have issues or questions or challenges writing, TLC is where you want to go. They're not going to write your paper for you, but they can set up a time and meet with you online and help you with that process. Google Scholar is an excellent resource for finding things in addition to the UC library. It's like typical Google searches, but within the domain of scholarly articles. Along the same lines as the Google Scholar is Copernio, which is a tool that you use that makes it much easier for you to find and download the papers themselves. Grammarly, we've talked a lot about. Zotero, we've talked about. Academic Writer, I talked a lot about. And for general APA type questions, you want to look at Purdue OWL, and OWL is for their writing libraries, online writing libraries. So you want to go to the Purdue OWL if you have questions around how do I put numbers into my paper, and if it's less than 5, if it's less than 9 or 5 or whatever the magic number is, when do I spell it out versus when do I put the number in? And Purdue OWL has that answer. It'll also have answers about how long should a title be, and in short, pretty much anything you ever wanted to know about APA is where Purdue OWL. There's also the style portion of the APA organization itself, but frankly, most people go to Purdue OWL. The things I've talked about today have been the importance of going and finding that email that you got that referenced Grammarly, activate it, get it set up, installed and figured out and start using it and learning how to use it. Use it in your personal life, not just in your school life, but Grammarly will help you become a better writer. I sound like a salesman for the company. I'm not, but I am a user of it. And after my doctoral experience, I actually subscribed to Grammarly for myself through a personal account. So I feel very strongly for the importance of using Grammarly in all of your written communications. You'll also want to check out Academic Writer. Even if you're going to use Word, you want to take a look at it because it might be a way that you can create yourself a nice little template to start from. It does a pretty good job of handling all of the stuff that messes up a lot of students about creating APA papers. And I can't say this one enough. Don't copy. Do not copy anything from a resource into your paper. Make sure that you write your words, or you and your group, if you're doing a group project, each person is using their own words to describe something. I can tell your voice whenever I'm reading your paper versus somebody else's voice. Whenever somebody writes something, they have a unique style, a unique cadence, a unique set of words that they'll use. I can tell whenever somebody copies and pastes something in simply by reading it. Well before the tools came along, I could always detect plagiarism because it doesn't flow. And so simply put, don't do it. Instead, give me your thoughts. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear what you think something is. And more importantly, if you're along the way and you're having trouble, ask questions. And those questions come to me. They can go to the Learning Commons, but don't just not ask. So if you're having challenges, do ask for help.